Well, when you start a sentence with a perfect, like katal, it starts with katal. When you start a sentence with an imperfect, like yiktol, it's yiktol. When you start a sentence with a preterite, it's yiktol, but it's got an and in front of it. All right? It's got an and in front of it. Now, when that and is pointed, how do we point the conjunction and? Well, by the rules, you add a wow, right? Now, how are you supposed to point the wow? With a schwa, all right? Is there any reason we couldn't add a schwa here due to the rules of schwa? No, you could add a schwa here, okay? However, they didn't do that. They had a distinctive marking, a distinctive vowel pointing, a distinctive connecting vowel, if you will, to join the wow when it was used with these preterite forms. And here's the way the wow is pointed, not schwa, but pathak dagesh forte. Now you might recognize the pointing of pathak dagesh forte as the pointing not of the conjunction but of the definite article. All right? That's in a sense irrelevant, other than at least you've already know this combination and what it can do if you have a guttural letter or something like that. And oh, by the way, we do have a guttural letter as an imperfect prefix. More on that in a minute. So you already know about a pathak dagesh forte from the definite article. So if you see what looks like an imperfect verb form, but it begins with a pathak, a wow, and a pathak dagesh forte, it's not imperfect, but it's preterite. And therefore the tense value is past, not future. Because this looks like an imperfect, almost all grammatical explanations of this, as well as all Hebrew students, past, present, and I dare say future, do not call this the preterite, which is sort of its old historical name, but they refer to this as an imperfect while consecutive. That's really kind of a nonsense explanation because it's really not an imperfect. And the while consecutive is talking about how the wow is used, not what the verb form is. Right? But this is the term you need to know because this is what essentially it's called, imperfect while consecutive. The danger in calling it this, and why I've tried to explain this slightly different than some other books, is that if you call it an imperfect while consecutive, a lot of students tend to think that it's really an imperfect, and that somehow the while consecutive does some kind of voodoo to it and changes an imperfect into a perfect, or changes a future tense into a past tense, as though this is a conversion. In fact, some grammar books used to call it while conversive, which is simply wrong. Okay? But again, there's a whole literature on these kinds of questions, and that need not really detain us. But imperfect while consecutive, you see, is not a footnote to the imperfect, as though there are two tenses, perfect, imperfect, and then, oh, by the way, there's this goofy thing connected to the imperfect that's really a imperfect while consecutive. No. There are really three tenses. Perfect, imperfect, and imperfect while consecutive, as though that were its own category. And when you fill in the boxes, and yes, you will be filling in the boxes, okay, when it says tense or aspect, write perfect if it's perfect. I abbreviate it PF. If it's imperfect, write imperfect. And if it's imperfect while consecutive, write imperfect. I tend to use WC or something like that. Imperfect WC, which in this case does not stand for water closet, or the old null. Imperfect while consecutive. Okay? That's just my little abbreviation. You will hear people talking about while consecutive forms or vayiktol forms. Sometimes this is simply called a vayiktol form, which again is simply transliterating it, and you'll see the vay there as indicating how the wow is pointed. Okay. Sometimes they do this just without the vowels, and you'll see this in the textbooks, which is really yik-to with a wow in front of it. Okay. That's just kind of some technical nomenclature for wading through secondary literature once in a while, if you actually dig around in there. Now, how does this work? Let me stop. Any questions so far? This is fairly straightforward, I hope, even though it's a little confusing. Yeah.
The other time that we would see this would be prior to a composite schwa, but we're never going to have a composite schwa in the imperfect, correct?
I lost you. Say that again.
The wow.
You're asking about, is the wow ever going to play tricks on you?
The wow with the pata
Right.
underneath. The only other time we ever see that is prior to a composite schwa.
Yes.
But we would never see that in.
I understand your question.
Correct?
It's a good one. You're sort of asking, when is a wow with a pathak, when is a wow with a pathak going to be something other than this? Right, and the only time you get a wow with a pathak is when you're adding the conjunction, this is an aside, to a form like ivadim. Am I on that? To a form like ivadim, right?
Correct.
In which case this by rule of schwa becomes a pathak. So here's a wow with a pathak that's not wow consecutive.
But we would never
I think
have
you're looking at it wrong. It's a very good question, all right, but you're looking at it wrong. And the answer to your question is, well, the first question is, what part of speech is this?
No, that's a noun.
This is a noun,
Yeah.
all right, this is a noun. But the fact is, it's not an imperfect, all right. What letters are going to follow a wow consecutive? What letters, what consonants?
You can pick.
4. There's 4 letters. There's only 4 letters that can follow this, right? And it's yik, tick, ek, and nick, right? That's it.
It's not going to happen.
Right. Right. It's going to be a yod, a tau, an aleph, or a nun, because those are the only 4 letters that are used as imperfect prefixes, and these things only attach to forms that look like imperfects.